The silent millionaire. The scent of dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun and the faint, comforting aroma of old books filled Martha Johnson's modest Spokane home. At 67, recently widowed, Martha carried the quiet weight of grief for her late husband, George, a man who had taught her the value of hard work, thrift, and the firm belief that luck was for fools and gamblers. Lotteries? Martha scoffed at the very notion. A tax on hope, George used to say. They'd spent their lives building something tangible, a home, a family, a legacy of quiet resilience. Fantasies of instant wealth held no appeal for them. George, a carpenter by trade, had built their life brick by brick, board by board, instilling in Martha the deep appreciation for earned success, not chance. His hands, perpetually stained with sawdust and paint, were a symbol of honest labor. Martha's hands, in turn, bore the marks of countless canning seasons, hours in the garden, and years spent caring for their modest household. Their world was one of practicality, of careful budgeting, of making do and making something meaningful from little. So it was with a touch of irony, and perhaps a flicker of impulse brought on by a particularly melancholic afternoon, that Martha found herself at the checkout of her local grocery store, fumbling for change. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile glow on the endless aisles of processed goods. The young cashier, barely out of high school, with a cascade of brightly dyed hair, smiled brightly. "Just $2 more, ma'am, and you can add a lottery ticket to your purchase. Feeling lucky today?" Martha, tired and distracted by a list of forgotten items she needed to go back for, simply nodded, a silent "why not?" escaping her lips as she handed over a $5 bill. It was a momentary lapse, a tiny rebellion against the relentless pragmatism of her life. The ticket, a flimsy rectangle of brightly colored paper adorned with cartoonish symbols, was tucked into her purse and promptly forgotten, relegated to the same mental drawer as overdue bills and unread junk mail. It joined a collection of grocery lists, old receipts, and a single faded photograph of George from their honeymoon in Oregon, a forgotten ghost in her utilitarian world. Days later, the subtle shifts in her life had returned to their quiet rhythm. The rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the gentle murmur of the wind through the old oak tree outside her window, the comforting weight of George's favorite armchair in the corner of the living room. Martha spent her mornings tending to her small, beloved garden, coaxing vibrant petunias and sturdy tomatoes from the rich Spokane soil. Afternoons were reserved for reading George's old carpentry books, finding solace in the familiar diagrams and the scent of aged paper. She missed him fiercely, an ache that settled deep in her bones, a constant phantom limb of grief. On this particular Tuesday, her grandson Henry, a bright-eyed 9-year-old, arrived for his usual afternoon visit. Henry was a whirlwind of energy, a curious mind, constantly asking questions, always absorbing the world around him. He adored his grandma's house, with its cozy nooks and the comforting smell of her baking. On this afternoon, he was engrossed in the local news, sprawled on the worn rug in front of the television. Usually, the news was a dull affair, filled with traffic reports and local council debates. But today, his attention was fixed on the screen. The news anchors were doing a live cross to the state lottery headquarters, their voices filled with forced excitement, a dramatic drum roll playing in the background. Martha paid them no mind. humming a tune as she buttered Henry's toast, her thoughts on her wilting basil plant. Suddenly, a piercing shriek. "Grandma! Grandma! Your name! It's on TV!" Henry's voice, usually a cheerful chatter, was now high-pitched, with a mixture of disbelief and sheer exhilaration, a sound that cut through Martha's mundane thoughts like a sharp knife. Martha, startled, nearly dropped the butter knife. "Henry, what in the world are you talking about?" Her voice, usually calm and steady, held a hint of alarm, a premonition of something extraordinary. He pointed a trembling finger at the television. There, emblazoned across the screen, beneath a flurry of confetti and a triumphant fanfare, was a name. Her name, Martha Johnson, $17 million winner. Martha felt the blood drain from her face. $17 million. It was an abstract concept, a number so vast it felt entirely unreal, a figure plucked from the pages of a fantasy novel, not the humble reality of her Spokane life. Her hands, calloused from years of gardening, began to tremble violently. The lottery ticket, the one she'd forgotten, the one she hadn't even checked. It lay, still pristine and unclaimed, deep in the forgotten depths of her purse. A forgotten ticket, a forgotten hope. And now, an undeniable, life-altering reality. She fumbled blindly in her purse, her fingers brushing against the familiar crinkle of the paper. There it was, unfolded. The numbers stared back at her, bold and unmistakable. Her numbers, they matched. Every single one. The date, the sequence, the Powerball number. It was hers. The silence in the kitchen was deafening, broken only by Henry's excited gasps and the distant, muffled sounds of the television. Martha sank into a chair, her knees suddenly weak, her mind a dizzying whirl of disbelief and a nascent sense of dread. $17 million. It was enough to change everything. Or, she thought with a sudden pang, enough to ruin everything. George's voice, clear as a bell, echoed in her mind. "Money can be a blessing, Martha, or a curse. Depends on how you hold it." The unwanted spotlight. The news spread like wildfire, carried on the invisible currents of social media and the relentless hum of the 24-hour news cycle. A local reporter was at her doorstep within hours, a microphone thrust into her face, cameras flashing like summer lightning, illuminating her quiet, ordinary home like a stage set. Martha, still in her gardening clothes, her hair in disarray, mumbled a few incoherent words, her mind reeling. The phone, a relic that usually rang only for telemarketers and her daughter, began to ring incessantly. A symphony of strangers, their voices a mixture of congratulations, thinly veiled requests, and outright pleas. Every distant relative she'd ever known, and many she hadn't, suddenly remembered their familial ties, their voices laced with an unfamiliar warmth, a sudden interest in her well-being. Her daughter, Sarah, a kind but perpetually frazzled woman in her early 40s, arrived with her husband, Mike, in tow. Their faces were a mixture of genuine joy and a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor of expectation. Sarah had always struggled financially, juggling bills and trying to make ends meet for her family. Her job as a part-time librarian barely covered their expenses, and Mike, though good-natured, was prone to elaborate, half-baked schemes that never quite materialized, leaving them perpetually on the brink of financial strain. Their dreams were bigger than their budget, and Martha knew they constantly felt the pressure of keeping up in a world that demanded more than they could give. "Mom, I can't believe it," Sarah cried, pulling Martha into a tight hug, her voice bordering on hysterical. $17 million! This changes everything. We can finally get out of that tiny apartment, send the kids to a good school. Maybe even start that organic dog biscuit business Mike always talks about. Think of it, Mom. No more worrying about bills. No more endless nights trying to make ends meet. Oh, Martha, congratulations. Mike beamed, his eyes a little too bright, already envisioning a future paved with unlimited funds. His hands, usually idly drumming on tabletops, now gestured wildly, as if conducting an invisible orchestra of wealth. Think of the possibilities. We could finally open that gourmet hot dog stand I've always dreamed of. The Mike's Magnificent Wieners franchise. We could be huge. We could take it national. Think of the endorsements. His enthusiasm was infectious, yet oddly unsettling. Martha offered a weak smile, her head still spinning from the whirlwind of emotion and the relentless media attention. The initial euphoria, if she had even felt it, had given way to a strange sense of unease. The attention was overwhelming, the expectations suffocating. She felt like a deer caught in headlights, suddenly exposed to a blinding glare. Stripped of her quiet anonymity, every smile seemed to hold a hidden agenda. Every compliment a preamble to a request. Then came Robert, Martha's nephew, a man she hadn't seen in over a decade, appeared on her doorstep 2 days after the news broke. Impeccably dressed in a suit that looked far too expensive for a casual visit. His smile was too wide, his eyes too sharp, constantly darting around her modest living room, as if appraising its worth, calculating its potential. Robert was a self-proclaimed entrepreneur, a title that Martha suspected translated to opportunist, someone always looking for the next big score, usually at someone else's expense. He specialized in vague promises and grand visions that always seemed to benefit him more than anyone else. Aunt Martha, my dear, dear aunt, it's been too long, he gushed, enveloping her in a perfumed hug that left her feeling vaguely uncomfortable, a cloying scent of ambition. I heard the wonderful news, and I immediately thought of you. You need a financial advisor, a trustworthy one, someone to help you navigate this immense fortune. I've got some incredible investment opportunities, Auntie. Low risk, high reward. We could double that money in no time. Think of the returns, private equity, offshore accounts, emerging markets. The possibilities are endless. He spoke in a rapid-fire cadence, his words a dizzying blur of financial jargon Martha barely understood, but whose underlying message was clear. Give me your money. He thrust glossy brochures into her hands, each promising exorbitant returns, shimmering with promises of an even grander future. Martha listened, her skepticism building with every word. Robert hadn't called, hadn't visited, hadn't even sent a Christmas card in years. His sudden appearance felt like a vulture circling its prey. Everyone, it seemed, wanted a piece of her sudden windfall. But what struck her most, what truly began to bother her, was the sheer volume of the requests. The phone calls from long-lost cousins with sudden, urgent medical emergencies. The letters from desperate strangers with sob stories that read like bad fiction. The insistent advice from those who suddenly saw her not as Martha, the quiet widow, but as Martha, the walking ATM. Everyone was asking. Everyone was demanding. Their voices were loud, their pleas insistent, their needs articulated with a jarring sense of entitlement. It was as if her sudden wealth had given them permission to shed all pretense of modesty. Yet amidst this clamor, she noticed something else, something subtle, yet profoundly impactful. Those who truly struggled, Those whose needs were most profound remained silent. Their dignity, their pride, or perhaps simply their exhaustion, kept them from asking. Martha's heart, though battered by grief and newfound anxiety, was still attuned to the quiet whispers of genuine need. It was a lesson George had taught her years ago, carved into the very fabric of their simple life. The most desperate cries often come from those who are too proud or too ashamed to voice them aloud. He'd seen it in the Depression, in the eyes of neighbors who pretended to be fine, even as their children went hungry. Martha had learned to read those unspoken signals, a skill far more valuable than any financial advice. The clinic's quiet despair, a few days later, the relentless pressure of the lottery win, the constant phone calls, and the endless stream of unsolicited advice began to wear on Martha. She felt a profound weariness settle into her bones, a fatigue that went beyond physical exhaustion. She longed for the quiet solitude of her pre-lottery life. Then, a more immediate concern arose. Her grandson Henry, her bright, energetic Henry, developed a nasty cough that worsened into a fever, his small body burning to the touch. Worried, Martha, in a rare moment of seeking convenience over cost, considered taking him to her private doctor, Dr. Peterson, who had a well-appointed office and a short waiting time. But then she hesitated. Dr. Peterson knew about her lottery win. She imagined the hushed whispers, the thinly veiled curiosity, the inevitable questions. She wanted to avoid any unnecessary attention given her recent change in status. Besides, Henry's condition, while concerning, wasn't life-threatening. Instead, she decided to drive him to the local free clinic, the Spokane Community Health Center, a place she hadn't visited in years, relying instead on her private physician and good health insurance. It was a decision born partly of pragmatism, partly of a subconscious desire to escape the gilded cage of her new reality. The clinic was a stark contrast to the comfortable, quiet environment she was used to. It was packed. The waiting room overflowed with anxious parents and restless children, coughing and sniffling, their faces etched with worry. The air was thick with unspoken worry, a palpable sense of struggle, a symphony of coughs and sniffles. The chairs were worn, some even torn, the paint peeling on the walls, and a faint smell of disinfectant barely masked the underlying scent of illness and human desperation. Children lay across their parents' laps, listless, their eyes dull. Parents fidgeted, checking their watches, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and thinly veiled frustration. Martha watched, her heart aching. This was a different kind of wealth, the wealth of health, and the stark reality of its absence for so many. They waited for nearly 3 hours, Henry curled miserably in her lap, occasionally whimpering. Martha observed the staff, especially a young doctor named Emily Chang. Dr. Chang moved with a weary grace, her shoulders slumped from what seemed like endless hours, her eyes tired, framed by dark circles. But her movements were precise, her voice gentle, her attention unwavering as she examined patient after patient. She spoke to the parents with respect, explaining diagnoses in clear, compassionate terms, even when her voice was hoarse with fatigue. She moved from one small examination room to another, a fleeting, weary smile for each patient, a quick, reassuring touch on a child's forehead. Martha saw a woman pushed to her limits, fueled only by an inherent kindness and dedication, a tireless commitment to those who had nowhere else to turn. There was no pretense, no artifice, just raw, unflinching empathy. Finally, it was Henry's turn. Dr. Chang, despite her obvious exhaustion, treated Henry with the same meticulous care she had given every other child. She listened patiently to Martha's description of his symptoms, checked his breathing, looked into his throat. "He'll be fine, Mrs. Johnson," she said, her voice soothing. "Just a bad chest cold. I'll prescribe some antibiotics and a cough syrup. Make sure he rests and keep him hydrated." As Henry was finally being discharged, his fever slightly down, Martha felt a quiet stirring within her. "Dr. Chang," she asked, her voice softer than she'd intended, born of a sudden surge of empathy, "do you ever feel overwhelmed?" Dr. Chang offered a small, sad smile, her eyes briefly meeting Martha's, a shared moment of understanding, a recognition of a kindred spirit. "Every day, Mrs. Johnson. We do our best, but there's never enough. Enough doctors, enough nurses, enough medication. Our equipment is outdated. Our only X-ray machine breaks down more often than not. We turn away so many who can't afford even our nominal fees for basic services, let alone specialists. It's heartbreaking to see children suffer when a simple prescription or a quick diagnostic test could make all the difference." She glanced around the crowded waiting room, her gaze sweeping over the worried faces, a silent plea in her eyes, a testament to the daily struggles she witnessed. Her voice was quiet, resigned, devoid of any demand or expectation, just a raw articulation of reality. Martha's mind clicked. Here was need, profound, urgent need, and it was not loudly demanded. It was quietly endured. This was the kind of suffering George would have recognized, the kind of silent struggle that deserved real, impactful help. Not the clamor for endless wants, but the desperate need for basic necessities. The Smiths' silent struggle. Back home, Martha's attention shifted to her immediate surroundings, to the microcosm of her own neighborhood. Her next-door neighbors, the Smiths, a young couple, Sarah and Tom, with 2 lively children, Lily, age 7, and Sam, 5, had always been a cheerful, outgoing family. Tom was a carpenter, much like George, with strong, capable hands and a booming laugh. Sarah was a dedicated schoolteacher, her gentle voice often heard drifting over the fence as she taught her children. They were the kind of neighbors who brought over homemade cookies at Christmas, always lent a hand with yard work, and whose presence made the street feel like a community. Lately, though, their laughter had quieted. Their usually well-maintained lawn was overgrown. The cheerful string lights on their porch remained unlit, their curtains often drawn. The children, usually outside playing in their inflatable pool or chasing fireflies, were rarely seen. Martha had noticed Tom leaving the house much earlier and returning much later, his shoulders hunched, his usual confident stride replaced by a weary shuffle. Sarah looked pale and thin, her bright smile replaced by a strained, almost fragile expression. They no longer dropped by for impromptu chats, and when Martha waved from her garden, their return wave was often brief and hesitant. Martha's intuition, honed by decades of observing human nature, told her something was deeply wrong. But the Smiths, ever proud, never spoke of it. They didn't ask for help, didn't hint at their struggles. They simply retreated, silently bearing their burden. Henry, who played frequently with Lily and Sam, came home one afternoon, his small face etched with worry, a seriousness unusual for a 9-year-old. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice uncharacteristically solemn, "Lily told me her dad lost his job, and they might have to move. They don't have enough money for rent. She said they might have to sell their dog, Buster, because they can't afford food for him anymore." His voice cracked on the last sentence. The thought of Buster, a floppy-eared golden retriever adored by both families, being sold, clearly distressing him. Martha felt a sharp pang in her chest. The Smiths, they had never asked for anything, not a loan, not a handout, not even a sympathetic ear, even when she'd offered vague pleasantries about tough times. They were proud, hard-working people, now facing a crisis in silence. This was it. This was the kind of need she was meant to address. Not the shouting, demanding voices, but the quiet, desperate ones. Their struggles were hidden behind drawn blinds and forced smiles, a testament to their self-respect and perhaps their shame. They were like the clinic, overflowing with need, yet utterly silent in their appeal. A profound realization settled over Martha. This lottery win, this unexpected fortune, was not just about her. It was a test, a chance to be truly rich, not just in money, but in purpose. The true value of this immense sum wasn't in granting every whim or silencing every demanding voice. It was in extending a hand to those who couldn't or wouldn't ask. It was about seeing beyond the superficial pleas and recognizing the quiet dignity of genuine need. George's words echoed again. "It's easy to give to those who shout, Martha. The real trick is to find those who whisper, or those who can't make a sound at all." The path less traveled, her decision made. A quiet calm settled over Martha. The frantic ringing of the phone, the insistent demands from Robert, the subtle expectations from Sarah and Mike, they all seemed to fade into a background hum. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a clarity she hadn't experienced since George's passing. This money wasn't just hers, it was a sacred trust. She called her daughter Sarah and arranged a meeting, not at her home, but at a neutral location, the office of a reputable financial advisor. She had chosen Miss Davies, a woman known for her ethical practices, her sharp mind, and her deep involvement in local community initiatives. Martha had read about Miss Davies in the local paper, a quiet force for good, much like herself. "Sarah, Mike," Martha began, her voice calm and steady as they sat in Miss Davies' tastefully appointed office. "I know this money is a shock for all of us, and I love you both very much. I want to help, truly, but not by simply handing over a blank check. That would be irresponsible, and frankly, it wouldn't be fair to me or to the legacy I want to build." Sarah, though still hopeful for a lavish future, looked somewhat relieved to have professional guidance. The burden of managing such a vast sum, even hypothetically, had clearly weighed on her. Mike, however, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his magnificent Wiener's dreams momentarily deflated. "I'm setting up a trust fund for Henry and Lily," Martha continued, her gaze sweeping over her daughter and son-in-law. "It will ensure their college education, a modest start to their adult lives, and a financial safety net for future generations. This is non-negotiable." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears of gratitude. This was something she'd always worried about. the crushing cost of higher education. For you both, Martha went on, looking directly at Sarah and Mike. I'm establishing a modest fund for genuine emergencies, unexpected medical bills, a true crisis. But for anything else, for business ventures, for significant purchases, I want you to present a sound business plan, a realistic budget. No more dreams, Mike. Concrete plans, with detailed projections and clear objectives. Mike's face fell slightly, but Sarah looked relieved. The pressure of unspoken expectations had been lifted, replaced by clear boundaries and a practical path forward. Martha knew she was doing the right thing, protecting her family from their own impulsive desires, guiding them towards true financial stability. Robert, upon learning Martha had hired an actual financial advisor and wasn't interested in his opportunities, made a hasty exit, muttering about missed chances and the foolishness of old women. He disappeared as quickly as he had arrived, his short-lived interest in Martha fading like smoke, proving Martha's initial assessment of him. His silence now was a welcome relief. The unseen hand of kindness, Martha's first act of true giving, was anonymous, carried out with the quiet discretion that had defined her life. She revisited the Spokane Community Health Center, not as a patient's grandmother, but as an observer. She spoke to Dr. Chang again, this time casually, asking more detailed questions about the clinic's operational needs, their most pressing equipment desires, their staffing shortages. She learned about their long waiting lists, the critical need for a new X-ray machine to replace their ancient, perpetually broken one, and the struggle to retain good nurses given their low salaries and immense workload. She saw the despair in Dr. Chang's eyes, the quiet resignation of a dedicated professional fighting an unwinnable battle against scarcity. A few weeks later, an anonymous donation of several $million arrived at the clinic's doorstep, accompanied by a simple, unsigned note. For the quiet heroes. The clinic's board of directors, initially skeptical, confirmed the funds were legitimate. The news spread like wildfire through the staff, a wave of stunned disbelief giving way to joyous tears. The funds allowed them to hire more doctors and nurses, alleviating the crushing workload. They purchased state-of-the-art medical equipment, including a new, high-resolution X-ray machine. They expanded their facilities, adding more examination rooms and a dedicated pediatric wing. The waiting times, once hours long, dramatically reduced. Chang's weary eyes now held a spark of renewed hope, and the clinic, once a symbol of strain, became a beacon of possibility, a testament to the power of quiet generosity. Martha, reading the local newspaper's jubilant report about the anonymous benefactor, felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling far more satisfying than any sum of money could provide. Next, the Smiths. Martha approached them cautiously, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, compassionate offer of help delivered with the utmost discretion. She invited Sarah Smith over for tea, a familiar ritual that had fallen by the wayside in recent months. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Sarah's eyes downcast, her usual vivacity dimmed. Martha gently, carefully broached the subject. "Sarah, I've noticed things have been tough lately, and I know you and Tom are proud people. But I've recently come into some money, an unexpected windfall, you might say, and I believe in helping our community, especially those who show strength and resilience in the face of hardship." She spoke vaguely of an inheritance from a distant relative, a convenient half-truth that allowed them to save face. She explained that she wanted to help them stay in their home and provide Tom with a new opportunity, one that aligned with his skills and dignity. Martha, with the help of Miss Davies, discreetly purchased their small home, handling all the legal complexities to ensure their privacy. She paid off their outstanding debts, including the ominous overdue notices that had begun to arrive. And she arranged for a secure, well-paying job for Tom in a reputable construction company where Miss Davies had connections, leveraging her new financial network. The job was stable, with good benefits, a far cry from the sporadic, low-paying gigs Tom had been forced to take. She made them promise one thing: that they would not reveal the source of their help. Their dignity, she realized, was more valuable than her public recognition. The Smiths, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude, tearfully accepted the weight of their struggles, which had been crushing them silently, lifted visibly. Their laughter returned to the neighborhood, brighter and more genuine than ever, a testament to the weight lifted from their shoulders. Buster, their dog, frolicked happily in their newly secured yard, blissfully unaware of the silent benevolence that had saved his home. Martha then set up several charitable foundations, focusing on small, local initiatives that addressed quiet needs, mirroring the model of the clinic and the Smiths. A fund for single mothers struggling with childcare, allowing them to pursue education or stable jobs. A program providing warm, nutritious meals to the elderly who are too proud to ask for help, delivered discreetly to their homes. Scholarships for bright students from low-income families who couldn't afford college but displayed exceptional promise and a thirst for knowledge. She became a silent force for good, a guardian angel to those who needed it most. Her impact felt without her name being shouted from the rooftops. Her generosity was a quiet ripple effect, transforming lives without seeking credit. A life reimagined. Her life, once defined by grief and the quiet routines of widowhood, was now vibrant, purposeful. She still lived in her modest home, though she did upgrade her worn-out sofa to a more comfortable, supportive one, and added a small, comfortable reading nook by the window, a place where she could enjoy her books and watch the world go by. She drove her reliable old car, its dents and scratches a familiar comfort, a symbol of her enduring practicality. Her newfound wealth hadn't changed her essence, but it had empowered her, giving her the means to act on the deep-seated compassion that had always been a part of her. The quiet acts of giving brought her a joy that no material possession ever could. She found herself smiling more, the ache of grief for George slowly receding, replaced by a profound sense of fulfillment. She continued her gardening, finding solace in the earth, the cycles of growth and renewal mirroring her own journey. The lilacs, now in full bloom, filled the air with their sweet, heavy fragrance, a reminder of George, but also of new beginnings. She spent more time with Henry, teaching him about gardening, about the importance of giving back, about seeing the world with open eyes and a compassionate heart. He was a curious and perceptive child, and he understood instinctively the profound truth of her actions. Henry, her grandson, often asked her about the lottery win. "Grandma," he'd say, perched on her knee as she read him a story, his small hand tracing the lines on her weathered skin, Did you ever feel like you were rich? Martha would smile, her eyes twinkling, a profound wisdom shining from their depths. Oh, Henry, I was rich the day I realized that true wealth isn't about how much you have in your bank account, but about how much good you can do with it. The money was a gift, yes, an unexpected and overwhelming one. But the real treasure was finding those who truly needed it and helping them quietly without them ever having to ask. It's about seeing the quiet struggles, my dear, and finding a way to make a difference without fanfare or expectation. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest blessings are those we can bestow upon others, unseen and unheard. She had bought a lottery ticket on a whim, a simple transaction for $2 and some change, a forgotten slip of paper in a forgotten purse. It had made her a millionaire overnight, but she became truly rich, immeasurably wealthy, when she chose to give not to those who shouted their demands, but to those who, in their quiet dignity, remained silent. And in doing so, she found a purpose, a joy, and a legacy far greater than any sum of money could ever provide. Her life, a testament to the quiet power of generosity, continued to unfold, one thoughtful act of kindness at a time. A silent millionaire, living a life of true, immeasurable abundance. She knew George would have approved. He always believed in making things, not just having them. And she had made something truly beautiful.